My name is Samuel Sterling. I am 32 years old, and 17 years ago, on a freezing November night that cut right through to the bone, my father looked me dead in the eye and said, "Get out. I don't need a sick son like you." I was 15, soaking wet, with absolutely nowhere to go. The reason? My younger brother, the golden boy, told a lie. A calculated, deliberate lie that my parents believed without a single question. Just like that, I was erased. 3 hours later, the police called them to the hospital. I'd been hit by a car. When my dad walked into that hospital room and saw who was sitting by my bed, holding my hand, his hands wouldn't stop shaking. Before I tell you what happened when he realized who had saved me, and the absolute shock that hit him, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy stories about truth and justice. Also, I'd love to know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, let me take you to the moment that changed everything, and then I'll take you back to where it all began. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the dressing room, adjusting my tie. It was a silk tie, deep navy blue, expensive. The suit I wore was tailored in Italy, a far cry from the hand-me-down oversized jackets I used to drown in as a teenager. I ran a finger over the small, faint scar just above my left eyebrow. It was barely visible now, just a thin white line, but if I pressed on it, I could still feel the phantom throb of the asphalt hitting my skull. "You ready, boss?" I turned. David, my executive assistant and one of the few people who knew the whole ugly truth, was standing in the doorway holding a thick folder. "Ready as I'll ever be, David," I said. My voice was steady. Took me years to get my voice this steady. Years of therapy, years of public speaking, and years of convincing myself that I wasn't the broken thing my father said I was. "They're here," David said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. "VIP section, row 3, just like you predicted. They took the bait." I felt a cold tightening in my stomach, but I didn't let it show. "Do they know?" "Not a clue," David smirked. "The program just lists the speaker as the director of the Lighthouse Foundation. No name. They think they're here to hobnob with the elite, maybe secure some funding for your dad's failing business. They have no idea they're about to watch their son deliver the keynote address." I walked over to the monitor that showed a live feed of the auditorium. It was packed. The University of Riverside State graduation ceremony. Thousands of students in caps and gowns, buzzing with excitement. And there, in the center of the VIP section, sat 3 people who hadn't seen my face in nearly 2 decades. My father, Richard Sterling. He looked older, his hair completely gray, but he still wore that arrogant set to his jaw. He was wearing a suit that looked expensive from a distance but was likely a few years out of style. He was leaning in, talking to the man next to him, probably trying to network, probably trying to sell something. My mother, Patricia. She looked tired. She was looking around the room nervously, clutching her purse. She always did that when she felt out of place. She looked smaller than I remembered. And Julian, my brother, the golden child. He was 28 now. He was sitting slumped in his chair, checking his watch, looking bored. He had gained weight. The sharp, athletic jawline of the high school quarterback was gone, hidden under a layer of indulgence. He looked like a man who was waiting for the world to hand him something he hadn't earned. "Look at them," I whispered. "They look so ordinary." "That's because they are," David said. "They don't have power over you anymore, Samuel." I nodded, but my hands were clenched in my pockets. It wasn't just about power. It was about the narrative. For 17 years, they had controlled the story. They had told the neighbors I ran away. They had told the extended family I was mentally unstable, that I was on drugs, that I was sick. They had painted over my existence with a brush of shame to protect their precious reputation. To protect Julian. Tonight, I was going to take the brush back. "Dr. Smith is here too," David added gently. "Front row." She drove the Porsche. I smiled for the first time that night. Of course she did. She knows I love that car. She said to tell you, chin up, shoulders back. Tell the truth, and let the chips fall where they may. I took a deep breath. The air in the dressing room felt cool, recycled, sterile. It was a stark contrast to the air that night. The night I left. That air had been heavy, wet, and freezing. I could almost smell the ozone of the storm. I closed my eyes and let the memory wash over me. I needed to feel it. I needed to remember the cold. I needed to remember the exact pitch of my father's voice when he threw me away. It was strange how memory worked. I could barely remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, but I could remember the pattern of the rug in the hallway where I fell. I could remember the sound of the rain hammering against the siding of the house like 1,000 angry fists. I opened my eyes. "Let's go, David." We walked down the long concrete hallway backstage. Students were lining up, adjusting their caps, giggling, taking selfies. They had their whole lives ahead of them. They had families out there waiting to cheer for them, to hold up signs, to hug them afterwards. I didn't have that. Not in the traditional sense. My biological family was out there, yes, but they weren't there to cheer for me. They were there because they thought it would benefit them. They were there because they were chasing status. I stopped at the edge of the curtain. The stage lights were blindingly bright. I could hear the hum of the crowd, a living, breathing ocean of people. "5 minutes, Mr. Sterling," the stage manager whispered, tapping her headset. I nodded. I looked at the folder in David's hand. Inside were the deeds, the financial records, the truth about Julian's success, and the speech. "You know," I said to David, keeping my voice low so the students nearby wouldn't hear, "I used to dream about this moment. When I was 16, living in the guest room at Dr. Smith's house, I used to fantasize about winning the Nobel Prize or becoming the president, just so they would see my face on TV and realize what they threw away. And now," David asked. "Now, I don't care about them seeing me," I said, straightening my cuffs. "I care about the truth. I care about making sure no other kid has to go through what I did." I looked through the gap in the curtains one last time. I zeroed in on my father. He was laughing at something the man next to him said, a fake, boisterous laugh that I knew well. It was the laugh he used when he was trying to impress someone richer than him. He had no idea that the man he was trying to impress, President Walsh of the university, already knew everything. He had no idea that the scholarship fund he was hoping to tap into for Julian's business venture was controlled by the son he had discarded. He had no idea that in about 20 minutes, his entire world was going to capsize. "Mr. Sterling," the announcer's voice boomed over the speakers, muffled from where I stood. "Please welcome the director of the Lighthouse Foundation." This was it, the point of no return. I stepped forward, leaving the shadows of the wings. The lights hit me. But to understand why this moment mattered, to understand why my father's hands would shake, and why my brother looked like he'd seen a ghost, we have to go back. We have to go back to the suburbs, to the perfectly manicured lawn, to the house that looked perfect from the outside but was rotting from the inside. We have to go back to the boy who was invisible. I learned early on that, in the Sterling household, Julian's tears were louder than my achievements. We lived in a 2-story colonial in a suburb that prided itself on appearances. My father, Richard, sold high-end insurance packages, and my mother, Patricia, was a stay-at-home mom who treated the local PDA like a royal court. And then there were the sons. Julian was 2 years younger than me. By the time he was 10, he was already the golden child. He had the bright blue eyes, the easy charm, the athletic build. He was the kind of kid who could break a vase and somehow get an apology from the vase. I was Samuel. Dark hair, quiet, bookish. I liked coding and chemistry. I was awkward. I wore glasses. And worst of all, in my father's eyes, I wasn't alpha. The cracks started small. It was the way Mom would pile Julian's plate high with food first. It was the way Dad would ask Julian about his pee-wee football practice for 20 minutes, then glance at me and say, "Do your homework?" before turning back to the TV. I learned to be small, to take up less space, to be a ghost in my own home. I thought if I caused zero problems, if I got perfect grades, if I was the model son, they would eventually love me the way they loved him. I was wrong. When I was 12, I won first place at the regional science fair. It was a huge deal. I had built a small robotic arm that could sort recyclables using sensors. I had beaten out 8th graders. The judges told me I had a future in engineering. They gave me a giant blue ribbon and a trophy. I ran out to the parking lot, clutching that trophy like it was the Holy Grail. I saw our family minivan. I yanked the door open, beaming, ready to show them. I won, I shouted. Mom shushed me immediately. Samuel, keep it down. I froze. In the back seat, Julian was sniffling. He was holding his wrist. What happened? I asked, my smile faltering. He tripped coming off the bleachers, Dad said, starting the engine. He didn't even look at my trophy. We have to go to urgent care. He might have sprained it. But I won first place, I whispered. That's nice, Mom said, turning around to stroke Julian's hair. Oh, my poor baby. Does it hurt? We'll get you ice cream after the doctor. Okay? We spent 4 hours in the waiting room. Julian didn't have a sprain. He didn't even have a bruise. The doctor said he was fine. But on the way home, they bought him a double-scoop sundae to make him feel better. I sat in the very back of the van holding my trophy. Nobody asked to see it. Nobody asked how the robot worked. When we got home, I put the trophy on my bookshelf. 2 days later, I found it in the trash. Mom said she was decluttering and thought it was just a plastic toy. That was the pattern. Julian needed attention. Julian was sensitive. Julian required careful handling. Samuel? Samuel was just there. By the time we hit our teenage years, the dynamic shifted from neglect to something darker. Julian realized he could use his status as the favorite as a weapon. It started with small lies. He'd break a plate and say, I did it. I'd deny it, but Dad would just sigh, Samuel, stop lying. Be a man and own up to it. I would get grounded. Julian would get a smirk. But the real turning point, the moment I realized I wasn't just unloved but actively disliked, happened when I was 14. My grandmother, my dad's mom, had moved into a nursing home. She was the only one who ever really saw me. She used to sneak me $5 bills and tell me I was the smart one. When she got sick, Dad kept a stash of cash in his home office, about $500. That was meant for her special medication that insurance wouldn't cover. One afternoon, I came home early from school and heard noises in the office. The door was cracked open. I saw Julian, then 12, rifling through the desk. He stuffed a handful of bills into his pocket. Julian, I said, pushing the door open. He jumped, whirling around. Get out. Put that back, I said, stepping forward. That's Grandma's medicine money. No, he sneered. I need a new game console. Mom said I couldn't have one until Christmas. I'm not waiting. I'm telling Dad, I said, turning to leave. If you tell him, Julian said, his voice dropping to a low, cold tone that didn't sound like a 12-year-old. I'll tell him you stole it, and I'll tell him you hit me to make me keep quiet. I hesitated. He won't believe you, won't he? Julian smiled. It was a terrifying smile. Who does he always believe, Sam? The sick one? Or me? He was referring to a new label Dad had started using. Because I spent so much time alone in my room, because I didn't play sports, because I didn't date, Dad had started calling me sick. Not physically sick. He meant weird, broken, wrong. You're bluffing, I said. I went downstairs and waited for Dad to come home. When he walked in, I opened my mouth to speak, but Julian came bounding down the stairs, tears already streaming down his face. Dad, Julian wailed. Sam took the money. I saw him, and when I tried to stop him, he shoved me. I stood there paralyzed. What? No, Dad, he's lying. He has the money in his pocket. Dad didn't even check Julian's pockets. He looked at me, his face twisting into a scowl of pure disgust. He walked over to me, grabbed me by the collar of my shirt, and shoved me against the wall. You steal from your own dying grandmother? He spat. What is wrong with you? Are you on drugs? Is that it? Check his pockets. I screamed. Just check his pockets. Don't you dare blame your brother, Dad roared. I know who you are, Samuel. I see you sneaking around. You're a sneak. You're ungrateful. He grounded me for 3 months. He took my door off its hinges so he could keep an eye on me. He told everyone, my aunts, my uncles, the neighbors, that I had a stealing problem. I never saw that money again. Julian got his game console a week later. He told Mom he found it at a garage sale for cheap. She believed him, or maybe she pretended to. That was the moment I stopped trying to win them over. I realized I was living in a rigged game. I stopped arguing. I stopped defending myself. I just focused on survival. I focused on my grades, my coding, my plan to get into a college far, far away. I thought I could wait it out. I thought I just had to make it to 18. But I underestimated Julian. And I underestimated just how much my father wanted a reason to get rid of me. The final blow came when I was 15. And it didn't involve money. It involved a girl, an ego, and a lie so devastating it would nearly cost me my life. There was a girl named Emily. She was in my chemistry class. She was smart, funny, and she didn't care about football or popularity. Julian, being Julian, decided he wanted her. Not because he liked her, but because she was the only girl in school who hadn't swooned over him. He asked her out. She said no. He tried again. She said no. Then she started studying with me. That was the trigger. That was the spark that would burn my entire life to the ground. The week leading up to the storm was heavy with tension. You could feel it in the house, like static electricity before lightning strikes. Emily and I weren't dating, not really. We were lab partners. But we ate lunch together. We laughed at the same nerdy jokes. For the first time in my life, I felt like someone actually saw me. Not the sick son, not the thief, but Samuel. Julian watched us. I'd see him in the hallway at school, leaning against his locker, his eyes narrowing as Emily laughed at something I said. It wasn't just jealousy. It was possessiveness. He couldn't stand the idea that the loser brother had something he couldn't have. On a Tuesday, Julian cornered me in the kitchen while Mom was in the garden. "Stay away from her," he said. No preamble, just a direct order. "We're studying, Julian," I said, pouring a glass of water. "She's not interested in you. Let it go." He knocked the glass out of my hand. It shattered on the floor, water splashing onto my socks. "You think you're smart, don't you?" he hissed, stepping closer. He was taller than me now, bulked up from football training. "You think you can embarrass me? Dad's already talking about sending you to military school. All I have to do is give him a nudge." "Clean this up," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "Make me." He walked away, leaving me to pick up the shards. I cut my finger on a piece of glass. As I watched the blood well up, I had a sinking feeling that things were about to get much, much worse. Thursday night, the storm warning had been issued. A massive nor'easter was coming down from Canada, bringing freezing rain and gale force winds. I was in my room, my doorless room, working on a history essay. Mom and Dad were out at a dinner party. They weren't expected back until 10. Julian came into my room around 8. He smelled like beer. He was holding a baseball bat. My baseball bat, the one I hadn't used in years. "She blocked me," he said, his words slightly slurred. "Emily. I sent her a message, and she blocked me." "I told you to leave her alone," I said, not looking up from my laptop. "You told her lies about me," he accused, swinging the bat lightly. "You told her I was stupid. I didn't say anything about you. Emily has her own brain." "Liar." He swung the bat and hit my desk chair. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. I jumped up. "Julian, get out. You're drunk." "I'm not drunk," he screamed. "And I'm not letting you win." He threw the bat down. Then, he did something that I still see in my nightmares. He walked over to the corner of my room, where the wall met the heavy oak dresser. "You know what Dad hates most?" Julian asked, his voice suddenly calm, eerie. "He hates perverts. He hates people who hurt others." "What are you talking about?" Julian looked me in the eye, smiled, and then slammed his own forehead into the sharp corner of the dresser. Thud. He did it again. Harder. Thud. Blood gushed from a gash above his eyebrow. He turned to me, blood streaming down his face, masking that terrifying smile. Then he ripped his own shirt, tearing the collar. "What are you doing?" I shouted, backing away in horror. "Stop!" Just then, headlights swept across my bedroom window. The driveway gravel crunched. Mom and Dad were home early. Julian waited until he heard the front door open. Then he started screaming. "Get off me! No! Sam! Stop! Please!" He threw himself onto the floor, curling into a ball, sobbing hysterically. Footsteps pounded up the stairs. Dad burst into the room, Mom right behind him. The scene they saw was damning. Me standing there, horrified. Julian on the floor, bleeding, shirt torn, sobbing. "Oh my God!" Mom screamed, rushing to Julian. "My baby! What happened?" Julian pointed a shaking finger at me. He wanted money. And when I said no, he choked on a sob. He hit me with the bat. And then he tried to touch me, Dad. He tried to touch me. The air left the room. My father turned to me. His face wasn't red. It was white. Cold, deadly white. The vein in his temple was throbbing. I stammered. "Dad, he did it to himself. He's drunk. Smell his breath." "Shut up," Dad said. His voice was a low growl. "He's lying. He's crazy." He hit his head on the dresser. Dad walked over to me. I thought he was going to hit me. I braced myself. But he didn't hit me. He looked at me with a look of such profound revulsion that it hurt more than a fist. "You are sick," he said. "I knew it. I always knew there was something wrong with you. Attacking your own brother? Trying to molest him?" "No!" I screamed, tears hot in my eyes. "Mom, please, look at the bat. I didn't touch it." Mom was cradling Julian, wiping the blood from his face. She looked up at me. Her eyes were hard. "How could you, Samuel? After everything we've done for you." "Patricia, get Julian to the car. We're going to the ER," Dad said. "What about him?" Mom asked, nodding at me. Dad looked at me. He looked at my bookshelf, my computer, my clothes. Then he looked at the window, where the rain was already lashing against the glass. "I don't want him in this house," Dad said. "Richard, it's storming," Mom said weakly. Not defending me, just stating a fact. "I don't care if it's a hurricane," Dad yelled, finally losing his cool. "He is a danger to this family. He is a predator. Get out." He grabbed my arm and dragged me toward the stairs. "Dad, stop. Please. I didn't do it." I fought him, but he was strong. He dragged me down the stairs, my socks slipping on the wood. He hauled me to the front door and threw it open. The wind howled, spraying freezing rain into the hallway. "Dad, please," I begged, grabbing the doorframe. "It's freezing. I don't have a coat. Just let me stay in the garage. Please." "Get out," he said again. He shoved me hard. I stumbled backward, falling onto the wet porch concrete. "I don't need a sick son like you," he spat. "Don't come back. If I see you here again, I'm calling the police and I'm pressing charges." Slam. The sound of the lock turning was final. I stood up, banging on the door. "Mom! Julian! Tell him the truth." Nothing. The porch light flicked off. I was in total darkness. The rain was freezing cold, turning to sleet. I was wearing a thin t-shirt and jeans. No shoes, just socks that were instantly soaked. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, waiting, hoping. Surely Mom would come out. Surely Dad would calm down and realize he couldn't kick a 15-year-old out in a storm. But the house stayed dark. I saw the garage door open, and the minivan backed out. I ran toward it, waving my arms. "Dad, stop." He didn't even tap the brakes. He drove right past me, the taillights disappearing into the rain. They were taking Julian to the hospital. They were leaving me behind. I was alone. The cold hit me then. A deep, biting cold that made my teeth chatter instantly. I wrapped my arms around myself. I had to go somewhere. I couldn't stay on the porch. The wind was whipping the rain right onto me. The nearest friend lived 3 miles away. The police station was 5 miles. I started walking. I walked down the driveway, my sock-covered feet numb against the gravel. I reached the street. The streetlights were blurry through the downpour. One step, another step. I was crying, but the rain washed the tears away instantly. The injustice of it burned in my chest. Sick son. Sick son. The words echoed in my head with every step. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to keep moving or I would freeze to death. I walked for what felt like hours. My feet were bleeding. My hands were blue. I was shivering so violently I could barely breathe. I reached the main road. The intersection was dark. The storm had knocked out the traffic light. I stepped off the curb. I didn't hear the car. The wind was too loud. I just saw the lights. Blinding, white lights cutting through the darkness. I turned my head. Twin beams. A grill. I tried to jump back, but my legs were frozen. They didn't listen. Impact. It wasn't like in the movies. It wasn't slow motion. It was violent and fast. I felt a massive blow to my hip, then my head slammed against something hard. The asphalt. Pain exploded in my skull. Then the cold rushing back in. I was lying on the road. The rain was pouring into my mouth. I couldn't move. I couldn't feel my legs. Please, I whispered. Someone. I heard a car door slam. Not a normal slam, but the heavy, solid thud of an expensive car. Oh my God! A woman's voice. Panic. Authority. Footsteps splashing through the puddles. A face appeared above me. A woman with silver hair, soaked by the rain, wearing a silk blouse that was clinging to her skin. She looked terrified. Don't move, she commanded. She stripped off her coat, a heavy, expensive wool trench coat, and laid it over me. I've called 911. Stay with me, son. What's your name? Samuel, I choked out. Blood bubbled on my lips. Okay, Samuel. I'm Eleanor. You're going to be okay. My dad, I whispered. The darkness was closing in at the edges of my vision. We'll call your dad, she promised, holding my freezing hand. Her hand was warm. She wore a ring that felt smooth against my skin. No, I managed to say. He said get out. He said, I'm sick. I saw her eyes widen. The rain dripped from her nose onto my cheek. He did what? She whispered. Don't let him hurt me, I said, and then the world went black. Waking up was a slow, agonizing process. It started with the smell. Antiseptic. Bleach. That distinct, sharp smell of a hospital. Then came the sound. The steady rhythmic beep. Beep. Beep of a monitor. The low hum of voices. I tried to open my eyes. It felt like my eyelids were glued shut. My head throbbed with a dull, heavy pressure, like a vice grip was tightened around my skull. My left leg was heavy, encased in something rigid. He's coming around, a soft voice said. I forced my eyes open. The light was blinding. I blinked rapidly, trying to focus. A woman was sitting in the chair next to my bed. It was the woman from the rain, Eleanor. Her silver hair was dried now, pulled back in an elegant bun. She was wearing a different set of clothes, clean, sharp, professional, but she looked exhausted. Her eyes were red-rimmed. Samuel? She asked gently. Where? My throat felt like sandpaper. You're at St. Jude's Hospital, she said, leaning forward. You've been unconscious for 3 hours. You have a severe concussion, a fractured tibia, and hypothermia. But the doctors say you're going to make it. I tried to sit up, but pain shot through my ribs. I gasped. Easy, she said, putting a hand on my shoulder. Don't move. You're safe. Safe. That word felt foreign. The police, I rasped. Did they? Officer Miller is outside, Eleanor said. Her face hardened slightly. They found your parents. They're on their way. Panic spiked in my chest. The monitor started beeping faster. Beep, 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 beep. No, I pleaded, grabbing her wrist. Don't let them in. Dad said. He said he'd arrest me. He said, I'm a predator. Eleanor's expression shifted from concern to something colder, something fierce. She squeezed my hand. Samuel, listen to me. I spoke to the police officer. I told him what you told me on the road, about them kicking you out. They won't believe me, I cried. Tears leaked from my eyes. They always believe Julian. He's the golden boy. I'm the sick one. You are not sick, she said firmly. And I am not just a driver who hit you. I'm Dr. Eleanor Smith. The name rang a bell. Dr. Eleanor Smith. She was famous. She was a legend in the academic world, a philanthropist, the chair of the board at the university. My dad had a magazine with her face on the cover in his office. He used to say, if I could just get 5 minutes with Eleanor Smith, I could sell her a policy that would retire me. You're the professor? I asked. I am. And I promise you, nobody is going to hurt you while I am in this room. Just then, the door banged open. My father walked in. He looked frantic, but not the kind of frantic that comes from love. It was the frantic energy of a man trying to manage a PR disaster. Mom was behind him, looking pale. Samuel, Dad shouted, rushing toward the bed. My God, we've been so worried. The police called and said you were hit? What were you doing running into the street? He was rewriting history already. What were you doing running? Not why did I kick you out? I shrank back into the pillows. We told you to go to your room. Dad lied, his voice loud, performing for the nurse in the corner. We didn't tell you to run away. You foolish boy. Excuse me. A voice cut through the air like a scalpel. Dad turned. He seemed to notice Eleanor for the first time. He had been so focused on his performance he hadn't looked at the witness. He froze. I saw the recognition hit him. His eyes went wide. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked at the woman sitting calmly in the chair, legs crossed, hands folded in her lap. You, Dad stammered. You're Dr. Smith. Mr. Sterling, Eleanor said. She didn't stand up. She didn't offer her hand. She just stared at him. I'm the one who hit your son with my car. Oh, Dad swallowed hard. His demeanor changed instantly. The angry father vanished, replaced by the sycophant salesman. Dr. Smith, what an unfortunate accident. I'm sure it wasn't your fault. Samuel is troubled. He has issues. We've been trying to help him. Troubled, Eleanor repeated. Is that why he was walking barefoot in a freezing storm 3 miles from your house wearing nothing but a t-shirt? Dad's hands started to shake. I watched them. His left hand, holding his car keys, was trembling violently. He ran away, Dad said, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple. After a discipline issue, we tried to stop him. He told me you kicked him out, Eleanor said. He told me you called him sick. He told me you said you didn't need him. He's a liar, Mom blurted out from the doorway. He attacked his brother. He's a deviant. Eleanor stood up then. She wasn't a tall woman, but in that moment, she looked 10 feet tall. I have been a professor of psychology for 30 years, Mrs. Sterling, Eleanor said. I know trauma when I see it, and I know a bully when I see one. She turned back to Dad. What kind of discipline issue involves putting a child out in a storm? What kind of parent drives past their freezing son in the driveway? Dad went pale. How did you? Samuel told me, she lied. I hadn't told her about them driving past, but she guessed it. She was smart. And I have a dashboard camera in my Porsche, Mr. Sterling. It recorded everything before the impact. It recorded the conditions. It recorded a boy who looked like he had been walking for hours. This was a bluff. I knew it, she knew it, but Dad didn't. We can handle this, Dad said, his voice shaking. We'll take him home. We don't want to press charges against you for the accident, Dr. Smith. We can settle this privately. Take him home, Eleanor laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Over my dead body. She walked over to the door and opened it. Officer Miller was standing there. Officer, Eleanor said. I'd like to make a formal statement, and I believe Samuel would like to speak to a social worker. He is refusing to go home with these people because he fears for his safety. Samuel? The officer looked at me. I looked at my dad. His hands were shaking so hard the keys were jingling. He was looking at me with pure hate, but also fear. Fear of Eleanor. Fear of his reputation. I won't go back, I whispered. Please don't make me go back. Julian lied. I didn't touch him. He's not going back, Eleanor declared. I will cover his medical bills. I will stay here until social services arrives. Now. She looked at my parents. Get out. You can't do this, Dad sputtered. He's my son. You lost the right to call him that when you threw him into a storm, Eleanor said. Get out. Officer Miller stepped forward. Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Sterling, I think it's best if you leave the room. We need to interview the boy alone. Dad looked at Eleanor one last time. He looked at her expensive clothes, her authoritative stance. He knew he was outmatched. He turned and walked out, defeated. Mom followed, sobbing into a tissue. When the door closed, the silence was heavy. Eleanor sat back down. Her hands were trembling slightly now, too. Adrenaline. Thank you, I said. Why did you do that? She looked at me, her eyes softening. Because I have a son, Samuel. He died 10 years ago. He would have been your age. She reached out and brushed a strand of hair from my forehead. And I know that no child deserves to be thrown away. That night, in that hospital bed, I made a choice. I wasn't Samuel Sterling, the sick son, anymore. I was the boy who survived. And I had a new ally. The next few months were a blur of legal battles and new beginnings. Social services investigated. They found the inconsistencies in Julian's story, the lack of defensive wounds on me, the angle of the cut on his head which matched the furniture in my room. But mostly, they saw my parents' reluctance to fight for me once they realized Dr. Smith was involved. They didn't want a public scandal. They signed over temporary custody to the state, and Dr. Smith, Eleanor, immediately applied to be my foster guardian. She had the means, the background, and the pull to fast-track it. I moved into her home. It was a sprawling estate with a library that smelled like old paper and lemon polish. It was quiet, peaceful. Education is freedom, Eleanor told me on my first night there. They can take your home, they can take your reputation, but they cannot take what is in your head. So I studied. I threw myself into my work with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. I wasn't just studying to pass. I was studying to prove I existed. I finished high school as valedictorian of my new district. Eleanor sat in the front row, cheering louder than anyone. My biological parents didn't show up. I went to college on a full scholarship, not because of Eleanor's money, but because I refused to take a dime I didn't earn. I majored in finance and social work. A strange combination, people said, but I knew exactly what I was doing. I needed to understand money to make it, and I needed to understand the system to fix it. I started the Lighthouse Foundation when I was 25. It began as a small mentorship program for foster kids. Within 5 years, thanks to Eleanor's connections and my aggressive investment strategies, it exploded. We funded college tuitions. We provided legal counsel for kids being abused. We gave them a second chance. I tracked my biological family from a distance. I hired a private investigator, not to stalk them but to protect myself. I watched them crumble. Without a scapegoat, the dynamic in the Sterling house shifted. Julian, the golden child, rotted. He got a football scholarship to a mid-tier college but flunked out freshman year. Too much partying. Too much ego. Then came the gambling. My investigator sent me reports. Julian was betting heavily on sports. He lost. He borrowed. He lost again. Mom and Dad enabled him. They bailed him out. They refinanced the house. They took out a second mortgage. They drained their retirement accounts. College fund? Gone. Inheritance? Vaporized. By the time I was 30, my father's insurance business had collapsed because he was too busy trying to fix Julian's messes to work. They were drowning in debt. And that's when I made my move. I learned that their bank was foreclosing on the house. The house where I was born. The house where I was kicked out. I used a shell company, SS Holdings, to buy the debt. I bought the mortgage. Technically, I owned their house. I could have evicted them the next day. I could have sent the sheriff to throw them out on the street. But I didn't. Not yet. I let them stay. I let them sweat. I let them wonder who this mysterious investor was who now held the deed to their lives. Then the invitation came. The University of Riverside State. Julian was finally graduating. It had taken him 10 years, 3 different colleges, and thousands of dollars in donations from Dad. Money they didn't really have. To get a degree in general studies. President Walsh, a close friend of Eleanor's, invited me to give the keynote address. "They'll be there," Eleanor said over dinner one night. We were eating salmon on the patio. Her Porsche was parked in the driveway, gleaming under the lights. "I know," I said. "Are you doing this for revenge?" she asked, looking me over her wine glass. "No," I said, and I meant it. Revenge is petty. Revenge is slashing tires or spreading rumors. This is justice. This is revealing the truth. "They think you're dead or in jail," she reminded me. "The last rumor I heard from their neighbors was that you were serving time for drugs in Nevada." I laughed. I checked my phone. My bank balance was healthy. My reputation was spotless. Let them think that. It will make the surprise better. "Just remember," Eleanor said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand, "you are not that boy anymore. You are Samuel Sterling. You are my son in every way that matters." "I know, Mom," I said, and it was the first time I called her that without thinking. So here we are, back in the wings of the auditorium. The announcer's voice faded. The applause started. It was polite, tepid applause for a speaker they didn't know. I stepped out onto the stage. The spotlight hit me. I walked to the podium, placing my hands on the polished wood. I looked out at the sea of faces. I found them immediately. Row 3. Dad was clapping politely, looking bored. Mom was fixing her hair. Julian was checking his phone. They didn't recognize me. Not yet. I had filled out. I had a beard now, trimmed and neat. I carried myself with the confidence of a CEO, not the hunch of a beaten dog. "Good evening, graduates, faculty, and families," I said into the microphone. My voice boomed through the hall. Dad looked up. He squinted. He tilted his head. "Today, we celebrate your achievements," I continued. "We celebrate your future. But before we look forward, I want to look back. I want to tell you a story about a stormy night 17 years ago. I saw Mom freeze. Her hand went to her throat. I want to tell you about a 15-year-old boy," I said, locking eyes with my father, "who was told by his own father that he was sick, that he was broken, that he was unwanted." The audience went quiet. The polite shifting in seats stopped. That boy was kicked out into a freezing rainstorm because his brother? I looked at Julian. Julian dropped his phone. His mouth fell open. Because his brother told a lie to cover up his own inadequacy. Whispers started to ripple through the VIP section. People were looking at the Sterlings. Dad was red, turning purple. He started to stand up. "That boy," I said, my voice rising, walked 3 miles in the freezing rain until he was hit by a car. Dad sat back down, collapsing as if his strings had been cut. He lay on the asphalt, bleeding, thinking he was going to die unloved. But then, a stranger stopped. I gestured to the front row. A stranger in a Porsche Cayenne. A woman who didn't care about the mud or the blood. A woman who saw a child in need, not a sick problem to be discarded. Dr. Smith stood up. She turned to the crowd and waved briefly. The students cheered for her. They knew her as the board chair. "That woman," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "is Dr. Eleanor Smith. She took that boy in. She raised him. She taught him that family isn't blood. It's who stays when the storm hits." I took a deep breath. This was it. "And that boy," I leaned into the microphone, "that boy is standing before you today. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking the air out of the massive auditorium. Then the realization hit. Oh my God! Someone in the front row whispered loudly enough for the microphone to pick up. I watched my father. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. He wasn't looking at me with anger anymore. He was looking at me like I was a tidal wave about to swallow him whole. His hands, those hands that had shoved me, dragged me, pointed at me, were shaking violently. He gripped the armrests of his chair so hard his knuckles were white. Mom was crying. Not the manipulative tears she used to shed for Julian, but real tears of shock. She had her hands over her mouth, shaking her head as if to deny reality. And Julian looked small. The arrogance was gone. He looked like the terrified 12-year-old who stole money from grandma. Only now, there was no one to bail him out. My name is Samuel Sterling, I announced, reclaiming the name they had tried to tarnish. And I am the director of the Lighthouse Foundation. A gasp rippled through the crowd. The Lighthouse Foundation was famous on campus. We had funded half the scholarships for the students sitting in this room. I built this foundation, I continued, keeping my eyes fixed on my family, for kids who fall through the cracks, for the kids whose parents choose reputation over truth, for the kids who are called sick simply because they don't fit the mold. I saw a security guard step toward the VIP section, sensing the tension. Dad was trying to stand up again, maybe to run, maybe to shout, but his legs seemed to fail him. I'm telling you this, I addressed the graduates, breaking eye contact with my family, not to air grievances, but to tell you that your origin does not define you. You can be rejected, you can be erased, you can be broken, but you can rebuild. I pointed to the scar on my forehead. This scar is from the pavement that night. It reminds me every day that I survived. And because I survived, I made it my mission to ensure that truth always wins. Eventually, I looked back at Julian. My brother Julian is graduating today, I said. The crowd turned to look at him. He shrank down in his seat. Congratulations, Julian. I know it took you a long time to get here. I know about the gambling debts. I know about the lies. Julian's face went gray. But I also know that everyone deserves a second chance. If they earn it. I paused. My father, I said, looking at Richard, called me sick. He threw me away. But looking at where I am, and looking at where you are, I let the sentence hang. The contrast was obvious. I was the keynote speaker, a philanthropist, a success. He was a failing businessman sitting in a seat he couldn't afford. I think we all know who was truly sick that night. The audience erupted. It wasn't polite applause this time. It was a roar. Students stood up. They were cheering for the underdog. They were cheering for justice. It was a thunderous wave of validation that washed over me, cleansing 17 years of shame. I saw Eleanor in the front row, tears streaming down her face, clapping her hands high above her head. She mouthed, "I'm so proud of you." My father couldn't take it. He scrambled out of his seat, pushing past the people in his row. He looked like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. Mom followed him, head down. Julian tried to leave, but his path was blocked by his own classmates who were standing up to cheer. He was trapped in the middle of his own humiliation. I finished my speech. Build your own families. Speak the truth. And never, ever let anyone tell you that you are disposable. Thank you. I stepped back from the podium. The ovation lasted for 3 minutes. As I walked off stage, my heart was pounding, but it wasn't racing from fear. It was racing from adrenaline. I felt light. I felt free. This is the moment that changes everything. This is when I finally took back the pen and wrote my own chapter. The applause eventually faded, but the energy in the air remained electric, humming with the kind of tension that precedes a lightning strike. I walked off the stage, my legs feeling strangely heavy, not from fatigue, but from the sheer weight of what I had just unloaded. 17 years of silence, 17 years of being the sick secret, all evaporated in 15 minutes under a spotlight. David was waiting for me in the wings. He didn't say a word. He just handed me a bottle of water and nodded. It was a nod of respect, of shared burden. He knew the cost of that speech. He knew it wasn't a victory lap. It was an exorcism. "They're waiting," David said quietly, once I had drained half the bottle. "Security says they tried to leave through the side exit, but the press is already swarming the front. They're cornered near the VIP reception area." "Let them wait," I said. I needed a moment. I needed to let my hands stop trembling. Not from fear, never again from fear, but from the adrenaline crash. I walked toward the reception area 10 minutes later. The hallway was lined with students who stared as I passed. Some whispered, some pointed, but unlike the whispers of my childhood, these weren't filled with malice. They were filled with awe. A few brave souls said, "Great speech, Mr. Sterling," or "Thank you for saying that." I nodded, acknowledging them, but my focus was laser-sharp on the double doors at the end of the hall. I pushed them open. The reception room was chaos. Waiters were freezing with trays of champagne, unsure whether to serve or flee. In the center of the room, a circle had formed. At the epicenter was Julian. He looked like a man whose parachute had failed to open. He was pale, sweating profusely, his graduation gown unzipped and hanging off one shoulder. He wasn't alone. He was surrounded by the group of friends he had paraded around with all week. The guys he drank with, the girls he tried to impress. But the dynamic had shifted violently. They weren't laughing at his jokes anymore. They were looking at him like he was a contagion. "You said he was dead," a girl with blonde hair was saying, her voice shrill. "Julian, you told us your brother died of an overdose in Vegas. You used that story to get an extension on your thesis." I didn't say that," Julian stammered, his eyes darting around, looking for an exit. "You misunderstood. I said he was gone. Like, lost." "No, you didn't," a guy named Mark cut in. He was wearing a varsity jacket, looking disgusted. "You cried, man. You literally squeezed out tears at the frat party about how much you missed him. You got pity points for 3 years because of a brother who is standing right there, very much alive and clearly richer than you." "It's complicated," Julian shouted, his voice cracking. "You don't know him. He's manipulative. He's lying. He's the director of the Lighthouse Foundation, you idiot." Sarah, Julian's on-and-off girlfriend, stepped forward. She was holding her phone, scrolling through something. "I just looked it up. He's verified. He's legitimate. And you," she looked up, her eyes cold, "you owe me $2,000 for the rent you said your trust fund was going to cover. Is there even a trust fund, Julian? Or is that a lie too?" Julian opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He saw me standing by the door. His eyes locked onto mine, filled with a toxic mix of hatred and terror. "You," he hissed, pointing a shaking finger. "You did this. You ruined everything." I walked into the circle. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. I stopped 3 feet from him. I was taller than him now. The physical intimidation he used to wield over me when we were kids was gone. "I didn't do anything, Julian," I said calmly. "I just turned on the lights. If the room is ugly, that's on you. You humiliated us." Julian lunged forward, his fists balled up. 2 large security guards materialized from nowhere, stepping between us. They didn't touch him. They just stood there, massive walls of muscle. Julian bounced off them and stumbled back, looking pathetic. "Where are Mom and Dad?" I asked. "They're outside," Julian spat, "trying to salvage the reputation you destroyed." "Good. Stay here, Julian. I think Sarah has a few more questions about that trust fund." I left him there, drowning in his own fabrications, and walked out the side door toward the private parking lot. The air outside was cool, a stark contrast to the heat of the venue. My parents were standing next to Eleanor's Rolls-Royce. It was a poetic tableau. They were huddled together, looking at the sleek, black vehicle with a mix of envy and fear. Eleanor was leaning against the passenger door, arms crossed, looking at them like they were bugs she hadn't decided whether to crush or ignore. When Dad saw me, he straightened up. He adjusted his tie, smoothed his jacket, and put on the face I knew so well, the reasonable salesman face. "Samuel," he said, stepping forward, hand extended. "Son." I didn't take his hand. I just looked at it. "Don't," I said. Dad dropped his hand, clearing his throat. "Look, that speech." It was powerful, dramatic, a bit embellished maybe for the audience, but I understand. "You're hurt." "Embellished." I laughed. A sharp, bitter sound. "Which part, Richard? The part where you dragged me down the stairs? Or the part where you drove past me in the rain? We were trying to teach you a lesson." Dad's voice rose, cracking the facade. "You were out of control. You were stealing money. You were attacking your brother. We had to be tough. That's what parents do. We made you strong. Look at you. You're successful. You pushed yourself because we pushed you away. In a way, you owe us for this." I stared at him. The audacity was breathtaking. He was actually trying to take credit for my survival. "I am successful in spite of you, not because of you," I said coldly. "Dr. Smith made me strong. You just made me cold." Mom stepped forward then. She was crying, twisting a handkerchief in her hands. "Samuel, please. We're a family. We can fix this. We didn't know. We didn't know you were hurt that night. We thought you went to a friend's house." "You knew," I said, looking her in the eye. "The police called you 3 hours later. You knew I was in the hospital. You knew I had nowhere to go. And you never came. Not once in 17 years. We were ashamed." Mom sobbed. "And then time passed, and it became too hard." "It wasn't hard," I corrected. "It was convenient. It was convenient to erase me so you could focus on your golden boy." "Speaking of Julian," Dad cut in, shifting gears. He's in a bad spot, Sam. He's made some mistakes. Financial mistakes. This stunt today, it's going to ruin his job prospects. We're struggling. The business is, well, the market is tough." He looked at the Rolls-Royce, then back at me. "We heard you're doing very well. The foundation, it has significant assets." Couldn't believe it. 5 minutes into the reunion and he was asking for money. It was so predictable it was almost funny. "You want money," I stated flatly. "We want help," Dad corrected, stiffening. "We're family. And frankly, with your success, you have a duty." "Stop." I turned to David, who had followed me out. "The folder, please." David handed me the thick blue folder. I opened it and pulled out a stack of documents. "Do you know who owns SS Holdings, Richard?" I asked. Dad blinked, confused. "SS Holdings? That's the firm that bought our mortgage last year. The bank sold our debt to them. We've been negotiating with them for months to stop the foreclosure." "SS," I said slowly. "Samuel Sterling." The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. Mom let out a small gasp and grabbed his arm to steady herself. "You," Dad whispered. "You own our house." "I own your mortgage," I corrected. "I own your debt. I own the roof over your head, the bed you sleep in, and the garage where you park that car you can't afford. I bought it all 2 years ago." "Why?" Mom whispered. "To throw us out? Like we did to you." "I thought about it," I admitted. "I thought about sending the sheriff to knock on your door at midnight in a rainstorm. I thought about giving you 10 minutes to pack your bags." I let the silence stretch. I let them feel the terror of homelessness that I had felt at 15. "But I'm not you," I said softly. I handed the folder to my father. He took it with trembling hands. "I'm not evicting you. You can stay in the house." Relief washed over their faces, disgusting and immediate. "Oh, thank God," Dad breathed. "Thank you, son. I knew you were reasonable. I knew." "But," I cut him off, my voice hard as steel. "The house is in my name now. The deed transfers to the foundation. You will live there as tenants. You will pay rent market rate every month. If you miss one payment, just one, you are out. And Julian." I looked toward the door where my brother was watching from a distance, terrified to approach. "Julian gets a job. A real job. No more consulting for your failing company. If I find out you've given him a single dime of the money that should be going to rent, the deal is void. Dad looked down at the papers. He looked trapped. He was no longer the patriarch. He was a tenant. He was a dependent of the son he had discarded. This is humiliating, Dad muttered, his pride flaring one last time. No, Richard. Eleanor spoke up for the first time. She stepped away from the car, her voice crisp and commanding. Humiliation is walking 3 miles with a broken leg. Humiliation is begging for your life on the side of a road. This is mercy, and it is far more than you deserve. Dad shrank back. He couldn't look her in the eye. We're done here, I said. You have the terms. David will be in touch with the lease agreement on Monday. Do not contact me personally. Do not come to my office. We are not family. We are landlord and tenants. Goodbye. I turned my back on them. Samuel, Mom cried out, reaching for me. I love you. I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I got into the passenger seat of the Rolls-Royce. Eleanor got in the driver's seat. David got in the back. As we drove away, I looked in the side mirror. I saw my parents standing in the middle of the parking lot, holding a folder of legal papers, looking small, gray, and utterly defeated. I thought I would feel sad. I thought I would feel a pang of loss. But all I felt was the smooth leather of the seat and the quiet hum of the engine. You okay? Eleanor asked, keeping her eyes on the road. I will be, I said. And for the first time in 17 years, the storm inside me finally stopped raging. 6 months later, the seasons had changed. The biting cold of winter had thawed into a tentative spring. The trees outside my office window were heavy with green buds, a promise of renewal that felt fitting. I sat at my desk at the Lighthouse Foundation, reading the final report from the private investigator. I didn't need these reports anymore, really. The threat was neutralized. But old habits die hard, and part of me needed to verify that the justice I served was sticking. Julian was working. That was the headline. He had landed a job at a logistics warehouse 3 towns over. It wasn't glamorous. He was driving a forklift, loading pallets on the night shift. Minimum wage plus overtime. The report included a grainy photo of him in a neon vest, looking exhausted, eating a sandwich alone on a loading dock. Sarah had dumped him publicly the day after graduation. His friends had vanished the moment the illusion of wealth evaporated. He was living in a small studio apartment, paying his own bills for the first time in his life. The report noted that he had tried to gamble once more, about 2 months ago. I had anticipated that. I had already flagged his name with the State Gaming Commission and the local casinos as a problem gambler. A little parting gift from his concerned brother. He was banned from entering. He was forced to live in the real world, dollar by dollar, hour by sweat-soaked hour. And my parents? They were still in the house. The rent checks arrived on the 1st of the month, every month, signed by my father. The signature was shaky, no longer the bold, sweeping autograph of the insurance tycoon he pretended to be. They had become pariahs in their neighborhood. The story of the graduation had spread, not just locally but virally. Someone had recorded my speech and uploaded it to TikTok. It had 4 million views. The title was, CEO Exposes Toxic Family at Brother's Graduation. The neighbors, the ones they had tried so hard to impress for decades, now looked the other way when they saw Richard and Patricia Sterling at the grocery store. They were no longer the perfect family. They were the people who threw their child away. The shame they had tried to bury me with had finally come home to roost. I closed the file and slid it into the shredder. Whir. The paper turned to confetti. It was over. Knock, knock. I looked up. Eleanor was standing in my doorway. She was holding 2 coffees. She looked radiant, wearing a bright yellow blazer that defied her 65 years. Mom, I smiled. To what do I owe the pleasure? I was in the neighborhood, she said, sitting down and sliding a coffee across the desk. And by in the neighborhood, I mean I drove 20 minutes out of my way because I wanted to see you. How are you holding up? Today is the day, isn't it? I nodded. November 12th. The anniversary. 17 years ago today, I walked into the storm. Usually, this day was a black hole for me. A day of depression, of what-ifs. I'm surprisingly okay, I said honestly. I was just shredding the past. I gestured to the bin. Good, Eleanor said. Because the future is waiting in the lobby. What do you mean? There's a kid, Eleanor said, her eyes twinkling. His name is Marcus. He's 16. He's been sleeping in the library at the community college because his parents kicked him out for wanting to be an artist instead of a doctor. The librarian called us. My heart squeezed. It was the same story, just a different remix. Is he? He's scared, Eleanor said. He's hungry, and he thinks he's worthless. I stood up immediately. I grabbed my jacket. Send him in? Or should I go to him? He's in the conference room with David, Eleanor said. But Samuel? Yeah. Tell him the truth, she said. Show him the scar. I walked to the conference room. Through the glass wall I saw him. Marcus. He was skinny, wearing a hoodie that was too big for him, clutching a backpack like it was a life raft. He was looking at the floor, his leg bouncing nervously. I opened the door. Marcus. He jumped, looking up with wide, terrified eyes. He saw the suit. He saw the office. He saw the authority. He shrank back. I didn't steal anything, he blurted out. I was just sleeping. I smiled. It wasn't a corporate smile. It was a sad, knowing smile. I know you didn't, I said. I pulled out a chair and sat across from him. I didn't sit at the head of the table. I sat right next to him. My name is Samuel, I said. And when I was 15, I slept under a bridge for a night before a stranger found me. Marcus blinked. He looked at my expensive watch, then back at my face. You? Me? I brushed my hair back, revealing the thin white line on my forehead. My dad told me I was sick. He told me to get out. He told me I would never be anything. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. He wiped them away angrily with his sleeve. My dad said I was a waste of space. He was wrong, I said firmly. Parents are people, Marcus. And sometimes people are broken. Sometimes they are weak. But their weakness does not define your strength. I opened the folder David had left on the table. This is a scholarship application, I said. And this, I pulled out a set of keys, is for a temporary apartment we keep for emergency cases. It has a fridge full of food. It has a lock on the door that only you control. Marcus stared at the keys. His hands were shaking. Why? You don't even know me. I know you, I said, my voice thick with the memory of the rain. I am you, and I'm telling you the storm ends. It ends right now. Marcus broke down. He put his head on the table and sobbed, the deep, racking sobs of a child who has been holding the weight of the world for too long. I put a hand on his shoulder. I didn't say anything else. I just let him cry. I sat there, the director of the Lighthouse Foundation, the man who owned his parents' mortgage, the man who drove a luxury car, and I felt more connected to this shivering kid than I ever had to anyone in my biological family. That evening, I drove home to Eleanor's estate. We had a Sunday tradition, dinner, no phones, just talking. We sat on the back porch, watching the sun go down. The sky was a brilliant canvas of orange and purple. You saved him, Eleanor said softly. We saved him, I corrected. I couldn't have done it without the woman in the Porsche. She smiled, sipping her tea. You know, Samuel, people always ask me why I stopped that night. It was dangerous. It was dark. Most people would have kept driving. Why did you? I asked. I had never actually asked her that specific question. Because I saw a boy who was still walking, she said. You were limping. You were freezing. But you were moving forward. You hadn't sat down to die. And I thought, anyone with that much will to survive deserves a destination. I looked out at the horizon. I thought about Richard and Patricia, sitting in a house they didn't own, trapped in a prison of their own making. I thought about Julian lifting boxes in a warehouse, finally learning the value of $1. And I thought about Marcus, sleeping safely in a warm bed tonight. I realized then that the anger was gone. It had been replaced by a profound, quiet gratitude. My father was right about one thing. That night in the storm changed me. It broke me into 1,000 pieces. But he was wrong about the rest. I wasn't sick. I was just being disassembled so I could be put back together into something stronger. Something bulletproof. I'm happy, I said, surprising myself. I know, Eleanor said. It looks good on you. The sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the world into twilight. But I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. I had built my own light. That brings us to the end of my journey. But in many ways, it's just the beginning. Looking back, I realized that the greatest lie I was told wasn't that I was sick or unwanted. The greatest lie was that we owe our loyalty to people who hurt us simply because we share DNA. We don't. If there is one thing I want you to take away from my story, it is this: you have the power to audit your life. Just like a business, you can look at the people around you and ask, are they an asset or a liability? Do they invest in your growth, or do they drain your spirit? My parents and my brother were emotional liabilities. They bankrupted my self-esteem to fund their own egos. Cutting them off wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of survival. It was the moment I stopped paying for their mistakes with my happiness. Resilience isn't about enduring abuse. It's about finding the courage to walk away from it and build a table where you are actually welcome. Now, I want to hear from you. This is the most important part for me. Has there ever been a moment in your life where you had to choose your mental peace over your family? Or maybe you found a Dr. Smith, someone who believed in you when no one else did? Please share your story in the comments. I read them. They matter. Or, if you can't find the words right now, simply comment the word "good" below. Just that one word tells me that you stand with survivors, that you believe in second chances, and that this story resonated with you. Thank you for listening. You are stronger than you know.